What happens when one of the biggest pop stars in the world walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a normal conversation, but ends up shutting down a question so directly that the entire room goes silent? Make sure to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The audience is already clapping as Billie walks out, a mix of cheers and curiosity filling the studio. She smiles politely, giving a small wave, clearly a bit reserved but still present. The hosts greet her warmly, one by one, as she takes her seat at the table. "Hi, it's so nice to have you here," Joy says, leaning forward slightly, smiling in that familiar daytime TV way. "Thanks for having me," Billie replies, her voice calm, almost soft but confident. Another host jumps in quickly. "First of all, congratulations. The album is doing amazing. The tour sold out in minutes. How are you even processing all of that right now?" Billie gives a small laugh. "I'm not, honestly. I think I just kind of keep moving and deal with it later." The audience laughs lightly. It's an easy moment. Comfortable. "That's fair," another host adds. "You've been in this spotlight for years now, but you still seem very grounded. How do you manage that?" Billie shrugs slightly. "I think I just stay around people who don't treat me like I'm something different. My family, my close friends, they keep me normal." There's a soft ah from the audience. Everything feels smooth. Predictable. Like a typical segment. Joy nods, but her expression shifts just slightly, like she's preparing to steer things somewhere else. "Well, you've definitely grown up in front of everyone," she says. "I mean, people feel like they know you." Billie nods politely. "Yeah, that part is a little weird sometimes." Joy leans in a bit more. "Weird how?" There's a small pause. Billie takes a second before answering. "Just people thinking they understand you based on what they see online or in interviews. It's not always accurate." The audience murmurs softly, some agreement, some curiosity. Joy smiles, but there's a sharper edge now. "But isn't that kind of part of being a public figure? I mean, you share a lot through your music, your image, your message." Billie nods slowly. "Yeah, but sharing art isn't the same as inviting people into your personal life completely." A couple of audience members clap at that. It's subtle, but noticeable. Another host quickly tries to balance the tone. "I think a lot of young people really connect with that, though. Your honesty, your vulnerability." "Yeah, and I'm grateful for that," Billie says. "I just think there should still be boundaries." Joy tilts her head slightly. "Boundaries, but you've also built a brand around being very open, right? Talking about mental health, body image, relationships." Billie's expression doesn't change much, but there's a slight shift. Her posture straightens just a bit. "I talk about things that matter to me," she says. That doesn't mean everything is open for discussion. There's a noticeable shift in the room now. The energy tightens just a little. Joy smiles again, but it feels more pointed. "Of course. But when you're influencing millions of young people, don't you think there's a responsibility to be transparent?" A small pause. Billie looks directly at Joy now. Not confrontational, but steady. "I think there's a responsibility to be honest. Not transparent about every detail of your life." The audience reacts, some claps, a few louder than before. One of the co-hosts jumps in quickly. "I think that's an important distinction, actually." Joy raises a hand slightly, not letting it go. "But where do you draw that line? Because for viewers, it can feel confusing. One minute you're very open. The next minute you're saying certain topics are off limits." Billie nods once. "Yeah, because I get to decide that line." That lands. There's a brief silence, followed by a ripple of applause. Joy lets out a small laugh. "Fair enough. But you can understand why people might question that, right?" Billie shrugs lightly. "People can question whatever they want. That doesn't mean I owe them an answer." Now the audience reaction is louder. Some clapping, some surprised murmurs. Another host leans forward, trying to ease things. "I think what she's saying is that there's a difference between sharing your work and being expected to explain your personal choices constantly." "Exactly," Billie says, glancing at her briefly with a small appreciative nod. Joy sits back slightly, but she's not done. "Okay, but let me ask you this. When fans feel connected to you on a personal level, don't you think shutting certain questions down might feel dismissive to them?" Billie pauses again, this time longer. You can feel the room holding its breath just a bit. "I think," she starts slowly, "that real respect goes both ways." The audience quiets down. "If someone connects to me through my music, that's amazing. I'm grateful for that. But connection doesn't mean ownership." That line hits harder. A few people in the audience clap immediately. Others follow. Joy's smile tightens slightly. Ownership is a strong word. Billie nods. Yeah, because sometimes it feels like that. There's a shift now that's impossible to ignore. The conversation isn't light anymore. It's real, and it's starting to get tense. Another host tries again to soften things. I think what people are really interested in is just understanding you better. Billie looks at her and smiles faintly. And I'm okay with that. Just not at the cost of my privacy. Joy leans forward again, clearly not satisfied. But where do you draw the line between privacy and accountability? And that's where the energy changes completely. The audience quiets down almost instantly. Billie's expression becomes more serious now, not defensive, not emotional, just very clear. Accountability for what? She asks. The question hangs in the air. Joy hesitates for a split second, then responds. For the image you put out. For the influence you have. Billie nods slowly. I'm accountable for my actions. Not for people's assumptions about me. There's a louder reaction now, some clapping, some sounds from the audience. Joy exhales slightly, like she's preparing to push further. Well, let's talk about that influence then. And just before she can finish, another host cuts in, sensing where this is going. Okay, let's take a quick moment here, because this is actually a really interesting conversation, she says, smiling but clearly trying to reset the tone. The audience laughs lightly, tension breaking just a little, but not completely. Billie leans back slightly in her chair, still composed, but the shift is clear. This is no longer a casual interview. Joy looks at her again, this time more directly. We're going to get into that, she says. And the way she says it makes it clear. This conversation is far from over. The audience settles again, but the energy has clearly shifted. It's not the same light, easy mood from the beginning. There's curiosity now, a bit of tension, and everyone can feel that something real is unfolding. Joy leans forward slightly, her hands resting on the table. All right, so let's continue this, because I do think it matters, she says, her tone still polite but more direct now. You mentioned accountability. When you have millions of young fans watching everything you do, listening to everything you say, do you ever feel pressure to present yourself a certain way for them? Billie takes a second before answering. She doesn't rush. I think there's always pressure, she says. But I don't think the answer is to become something you're not. A few people in the audience clap softly. Joy nods, but follows up immediately. But what if being yourself sends mixed messages? That's where I think people get confused. Billie's eyes narrow just slightly, not in anger, but in focus. Mixed messages how? Joy gestures lightly with her hand. Well, for example, one moment you're talking about not wanting to be judged, about privacy, and then you'll post something or appear in a way that invites attention. So people wonder, what are the rules here? There's a quiet ripple through the audience. Some nodding, some shifting in their seats. Billie leans forward a little now, mirroring Joy's posture. I don't think expressing yourself is inviting people to judge you, she says. There's a small pause after that. One of the co-hosts jumps in carefully. I think what Joy is trying to say is, there's a public perception element, right? People feel like when something is shared publicly, it becomes open for discussion. Billie nods once. Discussion, sure. But not entitlement. The word lands again, just like before. The audience reacts, this time louder. A few people clap immediately. Joy gives a short laugh, but it doesn't fully hide the tension. You keep using that word, entitlement. Billie nods. Because it's real. Joy tilts her head. But is it entitlement, or is it just curiosity? People are interested in you. Billie responds quickly this time. Curiosity doesn't cross boundaries. Entitlement does. A louder reaction from the audience, some applause, a few surprised "oh" sounds. Another host raises her eyebrows slightly. That's a strong distinction. Billie shrugs lightly. It's an important one. Joy pauses for a moment, then shifts her approach slightly. Let me ask you something more specific, she says. There have been times where you've addressed criticism online, sometimes directly, sometimes emotionally. Do you think engaging with that adds to the confusion? Billie's expression softens just a bit, but her tone stays steady. I think I'm human, she says. Sometimes I respond. Sometimes I don't. That doesn't mean I owe consistency in how I react to criticism. The audience murmurs in agreement. Joy presses again. But do you think that unpredictability makes it harder for your audience to understand where you stand? Billie exhales slightly, almost like she's choosing her words carefully. I don't think my job is to be easy to understand, she says. I think my job is to be honest. There's a noticeable pause, and then applause. One of the co-hosts smiles, nodding. I actually really like that. Joy glances briefly at the audience, then back at Billie. But honesty can still have consequences, right? Especially when you have influence. Billie nods. Yeah, and I deal with those consequences. Joy leans in again. But dear fans? That question shifts the tone again. The audience quiets down. Billie's expression changes, this time more serious, more focused. What do you mean by that? She asks. Joy continues, her voice measured. I mean, when you speak on certain topics, mental health, self-image, relationships, young people look up to you. They might take what you say very personally. So if there's inconsistency, or if boundaries suddenly appear, it can feel confusing or even hurtful. There's a murmur in the audience. Some people nod. Billie listens without interrupting. When Joy finishes, there's a brief silence. Then Billie speaks. I think it's dangerous to expect any person, celebrity or not, to be a perfect guide for someone else's life. A few claps. She continues, a little more firmly now. I've never told anyone to follow me. I've never said, live exactly how I live. I share my experiences. That's it. The audience reacts again, more clapping, more agreement. Joy doesn't back off. But influence doesn't require you to ask for it. It just exists. Billie nods. I know that. Then doesn't that come with responsibility beyond just your own experience? Joy asks. Billie pauses again. You can feel the tension building, not explosive, but steady, like something is about to snap into place. I think, Billie says slowly, that people need to stop expecting public figures to raise them. That line hits hard. The audience reacts instantly, some loud applause, some surprised laughter, some gasps. One of the co-hosts leans back slightly. Wow! Joy raises her eyebrows. That's quite a statement. Billie doesn't look away. It's true. There's a brief silence. Joy folds her hands together on the table. So you don't feel any responsibility for how your words might affect young fans? Billie shakes her head slightly. No, that's not what I said. Then clarify it, Joy responds quickly. Now the room is fully locked in. Billie leans forward again, her voice still calm but more direct than before. I feel responsible for being honest, for not promoting harmful ideas, for not pretending to be something I'm not, she says. But I'm not responsible for how every single person interprets that. A wave of applause follows. Joy listens, but her expression stays firm. But interpretation is exactly what influence is built on. Billie nods. And that's why people should think for themselves. That line lands even harder than the last. The audience reaction is immediate, louder applause, a few people even cheering. Another host quickly jumps in, sensing how intense this is getting. Okay, I think this is actually a really important conversation about celebrity culture and expectations. But Joy interrupts, still focused on Billie. Do you think that's realistic, though? Telling young fans to think for themselves when they're looking up to you for guidance. Billie doesn't hesitate this time. Yes, she says. The directness catches everyone off guard. Joy blinks slightly. Just like that. Billie nods. Yeah, because that's what I had to do. The audience quiets again, listening closely. No one taught me how to handle being in the public eye, Billie continues. No one gave me a manual. I had to figure it out. So I think it's actually more respectful to encourage people to trust their own judgment instead of relying on someone else. There's a strong wave of applause now. One of the co-hosts smiles. That's a powerful way to look at it. Joy exhales slowly, leaning back for a moment. But then she leans forward again, clearly not ready to let this go. All right, she says. But let me ask you something that I think a lot of viewers might be wondering. The audience goes quiet again. Billie watches her, waiting. Joy continues, her tone now sharper than before. When you say you want privacy, when you say there are boundaries, why talk about certain personal topics at all? Why not keep everything private? And that question hangs in the air. It's different from the others, more pointed, more direct. The audience feels it immediately. You can hear a few people shift in their seats. Billie doesn't answer right away. She looks at Joy for a moment, then glances briefly at the other hosts, then back again. When she finally speaks, her voice is calm, but there's a firmness to it now that wasn't there before. Because I choose to, she says. A small pause. Joy leans in slightly. So it's selective? Billie nods. Of course it is. Joy tilts her head again. And you don't see how that might frustrate people? And that's the moment where everything tightens again, because now it's not just a discussion. It's a challenge. The challenge lingers in the air for a second longer than usual. You can feel the audience waiting, some leaning forward, some glancing at each other, like they know this is the moment where things could either calm down or go completely the other way. Billie doesn't look away. "No," she says calmly. "I don't think my boundaries are there to make people comfortable." The reaction is immediate. A mix of applause and a few surprised murmurs ripple through the room. Joy gives a small, tight smile. "So if people feel frustrated, that's just their problem?" Billie shakes her head slightly. "It's not about problem. It's about expectations." Joy leans in again. "Whose expectations?" Billie answers without hesitation this time. "The ones people create for me without knowing me." That lands hard. The audience reacts, louder clapping now, a few people even nodding visibly. One of the co-hosts jumps in, trying to balance the tone. "I think what she's saying is that there's a difference between what fans hope for and what's actually fair to expect." Billie gives a quick nod toward her. "Exactly." Joy doesn't let the moment soften. "But when you share parts of your life publicly, don't you think you're shaping those expectations?" Billie exhales slowly, almost like she's heard this 100 times before. "I think people take what they want and build their own version of you," she says. "That's not something I can control." Joy responds quickly. "But you contribute to it." Billie nods. "Sure. But contributing isn't the same as being responsible for the entire outcome." There's a pause. The audience reacts again, steady applause, more confident this time. Joy sits back slightly, then leans forward again, her tone shifting just a little more serious. "Let me be very direct then," she says. "Do you think sometimes you send mixed signals?" The question cuts cleanly. There's no noise from the audience this time. Just silence. Billie looks at her, expression steady. "No," she says. That simple answer catches a few people off guard. Joy raises her eyebrows. "No." Billie shakes her head. "No. I think people interpret things differently, and then call that mixed signals." A few people in the audience clap at that, but it's more cautious now, like they're watching closely. Joy tilts her head. "So the misunderstanding is always on the audience?" Billie leans forward slightly again, her tone still calm but more grounded than ever. "I didn't say always. But I'm not going to take responsibility for every misunderstanding either." That line lands with weight. The audience reacts again, this time a mix of applause and quiet, "yes" sounds. One of the co-hosts nods. "That's fair. Communication goes both ways." Joy glances briefly at her, then back at Billie. "But you have a bigger platform. That changes the dynamic." Billie nods once. "It changes visibility. It doesn't change who I am." There's a brief silence. Joy studies her for a moment, then asks the question in a way that feels different, more pointed, more personal. "Do you ever think about how your image affects young girls specifically?" The room stills again. Billie pauses. This time, it's not hesitation, it's intention. "I think about how unrealistic expectations affect everyone," she says. Joy leans in slightly. "But you are part of that conversation." Billie nods. "Yeah, and I try not to contribute to harmful standards." Joy follows immediately. "But some would argue that even trying not to still puts you in that position." Billie's expression tightens just slightly, not angry but clearly engaged now. "I can't exist without being perceived," she says. "That doesn't mean I'm responsible for every perception." A wave of applause follows, stronger again. Joy exhales, then gives a small, almost incredulous smile. "You're very firm on that." Billie shrugs lightly. "Because it's true." The audience reacts again, some laughter, some clapping. Another host steps in, trying to bring some balance. "I think what's interesting here is that we're talking about the pressure placed on public figures versus the expectations from audiences. It's not a simple equation." Billie nods. "Exactly." Joy, however, isn't done. "But here's where I think people struggle," she says, turning back toward Billie. "You say you don't owe people explanations. You say you set your own boundaries. But then when people ask questions, even reasonable ones, you sometimes shut them down." The audience quiets again. Billie looks at her, calm but focused. "Yeah," she says. Joy blinks slightly, caught off guard by how direct that was. "Okay," Joy continues. "So why shut them down instead of just answering?" And this is the moment. The tone shifts completely, not louder, not dramatic, but sharper. More precise. Billie leans forward just a little more, her eyes locked on Joy now. Because not every question deserves an answer. There's a split second of silence, and then the audience reacts loudly. Applause, a few gasps, even some scattered cheers. Joy's expression freezes. For just a moment, then she lets out a short laugh. That's convenient. Billie doesn't smile. It's not convenient, she says. It's necessary. That hits even harder. The audience reacts again, louder applause, more energy in the room now. Joy leans back, then forward again, clearly feeling the shift but still pushing. Necessary for you, she says. But what about the conversation? What about transparency? Billie answers immediately. Transparency doesn't mean access to everything. Another strong reaction from the audience. One of the co-hosts raises her hand slightly. Okay, that's a really important point. Joy shakes her head slightly, smiling but clearly challenged. But you're on a talk show. The whole point is conversation. Billie nods. And I'm having one. There's a ripple of laughter from the audience. Joy presses again. Selective conversation. Billie nods again. Yes. That direct agreement throws the rhythm off for a second. Joy pauses, then tries one more angle. So if I ask you something you don't like, you just won't answer? Billie looks at her, completely steady. If it crosses a boundary, yeah. The audience reacts again. This time a mix of applause and quiet surprise. Joy leans in slightly, her tone now more pointed than ever. And who decides that boundary in that moment? Billie doesn't hesitate. I do. That's the moment everything locks into place. The audience reacts loudly, applause, a few cheers, even some people standing slightly in their seats. One of the co-hosts laughs lightly, shaking her head. Well, that's clear. Joy smiles, but it's tight now. Very clear. There's a brief pause. And then Joy asks the question that shifts everything into its most intense point yet. All right, she says, her voice steady but firm. Then let me ask you something directly, and you can decide if it crosses your boundary. The audience goes completely quiet. Billie watches her, waiting. Joy continues. When you talk about privacy, when you talk about boundaries, is that about protecting yourself, or is it about controlling the narrative around you? And that question lands heavier than anything before it. You can feel it instantly. The audience doesn't react right away, they're waiting. The other hosts glance at each other, sensing just how sharp that question is. Billie doesn't answer immediately. She looks at Joy, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she leans forward slightly. And you can tell, whatever she says next is going to define the entire conversation. For a moment, nothing happens. The question just sits there, heavy, direct, impossible to ignore. The audience is completely silent now. Even the hosts aren't moving. Everyone is watching Billie. She doesn't rush. She doesn't look away either. Then she finally speaks. It's about protecting myself, she says, her voice calm but firmer than at any point before. And I think it's weird that those two things are being framed like they're the same. There's a split second of silence, and then the audience reacts. Loud applause, some people nodding, a few exactly voices from the crowd. Joy holds her expression, but there's a pause before she responds. Well, I didn't say they were the same. I'm asking which one it is. Billie tilts her head slightly, but the question implies that protecting yourself is somehow suspicious. The audience reacts again, this time more mixed. Some applause, some murmurs. Joy leans forward. Or it implies that when you're in the public eye, there's always a balance between self-protection and public perception. Billie nods slowly. Sure, but that balance doesn't mean I have to give people access to things I'm not comfortable sharing. Another wave of applause. One of the co-hosts jumps in, trying to stabilize things. I think this is where a lot of people struggle, right? Because audiences feel connected, and public figures are trying to maintain their own space. Billie nods toward her. Exactly. Joy exhales slightly, then asks one more question, this time with a softer tone, but still pointed. So let me ask you this. Do you think you've ever been unfair to your audience when you shut things down? There's a quiet shift in the room again. Billie pauses, but not for long. No, she says. The directness lands again. Joy raises her eyebrows slightly. Never. Billie shakes her head. No, because I don't think setting boundaries is unfair. The audience reacts, strong applause, louder than before. Joy gives a small smile, but it's clear she's been challenged throughout this exchange. Well, I think a lot of people would still debate that. Billie nods. They can. That simple answer gets a ripple of laughter and clapping. There's a brief pause, and for the first time, Joy leans back in her chair without immediately following up. Another host steps in quickly, smiling. Okay, I think we've covered a lot there, she says, half laughing. That was intense but important. The audience laughs, tension finally breaking a bit. Billie leans back slightly too, her posture relaxing just a little now that the peak of the moment has passed. Yeah, she says quietly. I think it matters. The co-host nods. It definitely does. And honestly, I think a lot of people at home are probably relating to this in different ways. Joy glances toward the audience, then back at Billie. There's a shift now, not quite an apology, but less confrontational. Well, she says, I'll give you this. You're very clear about where you stand. A small smile from Billie. I try to be. The audience claps again, this time lighter, more appreciative than reactive. Another host jumps in, steering the conversation toward a softer close. Before we wrap, I do want to say, regardless of the debate, your message about being yourself and setting boundaries clearly resonates with a lot of people. Billie nods. That's all I really want. For people to feel like they can decide things for themselves. There's a warm round of applause. Joy gives a small nod. Fair enough. And just like that, the segment begins to wind down. The host turns slightly toward the camera. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back. The audience claps as the music plays, and the cameras slowly pull back. But the moment doesn't end there. Because almost immediately after the show cuts to break, you can see the shift in the room. Some audience members are still talking to each other, clearly reacting to what just happened. A few are shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling like they just witnessed something real and rare on daytime TV. One woman in the front row turns to the person next to her and says quietly, "She handled that so well." Another person responds, "Yeah, she didn't back down at all." At the table, the hosts exchange quick looks. One of them leans toward Joy slightly, saying something off mic. Joy nods, still composed but thoughtful. Billie sits back in her chair, taking a small breath, her expression finally softening now that the cameras aren't focused tightly on her. It's not dramatic. It's just real. Behind the scenes, producers are already moving quickly. Clips are being marked. Moments are being flagged. Because everyone knows that exchange is going to be talked about. And they're right. Within minutes of the show airing, clips start circulating online. Short segments of the conversation, especially the most direct lines, begin showing up everywhere. Not every question deserves an answer. I get to decide that line. Transparency doesn't mean access to everything. Those lines start trending almost immediately. People begin reacting in real time. Some viewers praise Billie for standing her ground, calling her calm, articulate, and unshaken. Others side with Joy, arguing that public figures should expect tough questions and be open to discussion. Debates start forming in comment sections, on social platforms, across different communities. One post reads, "She didn't destroy anything. She just avoided answering." Another says, "No, she set boundaries." There's a difference. The conversation grows. Clips are replayed, slowed down, analyzed. Body language gets discussed. Tone gets dissected. People debate whether Joy pushed too far, or whether she was simply doing her job. Others focus entirely on Billie's composure, pointing out how she never raised her voice, never lost control, but still stayed firm the entire time. Even media outlets start picking it up. Headlines begin appearing, framing the moment in different ways. Some dramatic, some supportive, some critical. And behind all of that, one thing is clear. It wasn't just another interview. It was a moment people felt. Back in the studio, when the show returns from break, the tone is lighter again. The next segment moves on, as daytime TV always does. But the energy from that conversation lingers. Because everyone in that room, and everyone watching, knows they just saw something real. Not scripted. Not polished. Just a genuine clash of perspectives, handled in real time. And that's what makes it stick. Make sure to share your opinion in the comments. Do you think Billie was right to shut the question down, or should she have answered more openly? And don't forget to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout for more real talk show stories.